Okay, good to see you. It's our Gompa Rapso class. We're going to begin with some prayers, which probably are not necessary to put up, but maybe it's nice to have up anyway. We'll say this verse of refuge in generating bodhicitta that's reputed to have been composed by Atisha to begin with. Sangye chodang soki chognam la Jangju bardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chunyen gi pe sognam gi drola penche sange drupa sho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki chognam la Jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chunyen gi pe sognam ki drola penche sangye drupa sho. So if you can think in your mind where it says dagi, what does it say? Just a little above there. Dagi chunyen gi pe sognam ki. It's just because the word nyen means to listen to, but it could also be to sam or gom. That is, generally we try to think of that we're creating merit by listening, contemplating, and meditating on the Dharma. Dagichu. So there's not one word that encompasses the three that I can think of. So that's why generally they have chunyen there. And then offering a short mandala. If you can imagine with a sense of renunciation, the entire world that you inhabit, your environment, and extend that on to the whole world, the solar system, the galaxy, other galaxies, and offer that, all of our samsaric experience, that appearance to the Buddha, transformed into a Buddha realm. This is the supreme way of quickly accumulating merit. By offering this ground anointed with perfume and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, sun and moon, visualized as a Buddha realm, may all migrators enjoy a pure realm. And then a request to our primordial guru, O holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please send down a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Rana Mandala Kam Nirya Dayami. Okay, thank you. So good to see you. We're going to just begin with a little meditation as usual. Greetings to Don and who's just appeared. Okay, so sitting comfortably. Relax your body. Even that may be difficult sometime. Relax your mind, which is more subtle. No worries. Place your attention on the breathing in front. And hold that with mindfulness. See if you can discriminate that mental factor. First, recognizing the breathing. Once you've recognized it and it's been cognized, you can hold it in memory. Before it's cognized, there's nothing to hold in memory. So you have to find it first of all. exercise alertness, a mental factor that recognizes whether your mind is wandering onto other thoughts. You might still be aware of the breathing, but part of your mental energy is attending to some other thought streams. And cut that off if that's the case, and reinvest that mental energy into simply watching the breathing. Generally, when you're able to keep concentration for 7 or 21 respirations, including the endpoints, without being distracted, it's time to move on to a more subtle object. In this case, our mental consciousness. First, recognizing its contents as a means to see the subtler substratum of the mind within which that contents is rising and disintegrating. And the aspect of that mind that we're looking at is its lack of any obstruction, its clear light nature. When we say the mind is clear and knowing, we can indirectly realize that it is knowing. That's not the main thing that we're recognizing here. We can recognize that we are, an aspect of the mind is that it is knowing the phenomena. Here it's the clarity of the mind, which in this case means its conventional clear light nature. So all of the worries, samsaric plans, frustrations, hopes, all of them are transient events. And that the nature of the mind is such that it allows for the development of qualities that we do not yet have. Even if we don't develop those qualities completely this lifetime, such as renunciation or compassion, we can leave the imprints in our mind that in future lives we can easily develop those qualities. So everything's okay. That in particular, we can use this opportunity right now, this auspicious moment of leisure and endowment that the Buddha praised so often, because to recognize it leads a certain urgency in our practice, gives a certain power to our practice, because we understand that it comes so infrequently among the cycle of rebirths within cyclic existence, our own personal cycle, that we've got the opportunity right now and to make use of it for one of the two great purposes of liberation or enlightenment, or at least leaving imprints to those. Thinking in particular of all sentient beings, especially in political and tortured times like the present, especially our enemies, those who have different way of thinking. Not necessarily, we wouldn't necessarily think of all of them as our enemy, but maybe frustratingly, all of them are suffering the same as ourselves. We're all immersed in cyclic existence without any way of getting out immediately apparent to us. We have the fortune to have met the Buddha Dharma. Where would we be now, as Lama Yeshe once said to me, if we hadn't met the Dharma? We see a use for this life, and it would be so wonderful if we could share that with others skillfully. But people's minds are not easily persuaded. It may take many, many lifetimes to lead them into a path for their own welfare, even though it's for their own welfare. So think, in order to really benefit sentient beings, all of whom have a kinship with us in many different ways, as having been our mother, our friends, and thinking broadly, even when they were enemies, benefiting us in many ways, as strangers, providing the infrastructure for our lives, to be able to eventually lead them all out of suffering and into enlightenment, we need ourselves to first achieve that state. To achieve that state of omniscience requires the accumulation of the collection of merit and collection of wisdom, which were explained by Nagarjuna and exemplified and elaborated upon by Chandrakirti in his Madhyamakavatara. And more recently, although many centuries ago, Lama Tsongkhapa rephrased and elaborated on those in his Illumination of the Intention, Gompa Rapso, which we are studying. So think, I'm going to listen, contemplate, and meditate on the material, sometimes meditating in the class, sometimes meditating afterwards when we've contemplated again, when we've studied, in order to accumulate these two collections for the sake of achieving enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. I'm going to participate for that purpose today in order to achieve enlightenment. That's my overarching goal for the sake of all sentient beings. Okay. Thank you. Good to see some of you. Mintu and Rachel are here also. Good to see you guys. How are we doing? Does anyone have any observations about our meditation or questions, Dharma itches, before we begin? Don, you okay? Huh?
Yes, thank you, George. I'm okay.
You should, all of us should figure out where the unmute button is when it takes so long.
Well, I have two computers here and I grab the wrong mouse sometimes.
Right. Oh, I understand. Okay. Okay. Richard, how are you doing? Good. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we're missing some of our other stalwarts. We have a group of our stalwarts here, so I'm not sure what's going on. One of my friends and physical guru, Sarat, passed away suddenly a couple of days ago. He was the son, the nephew, I think, of Pattabhi Jois, with whom I studied Hatha Yoga in India some years ago. John Campbell was also a very close disciple of that, and John had mentioned that to me. Sarat was, I think, what did I say, Doris, 53 or 58? I can't remember. Anyway,
53, and I think he was the grandson.
the grandson of Pattabhi Jois. Okay. So Sarat was also one of the people who would adjust. It was only Guruji, Pattabhi Jois, and Sarat who were the, would adjust our positions and everything and lead us. So he suddenly passed away. So John had mentioned in a message to me that it struck home to him the fact that the time of death is totally uncertain. There was no sense of him being sick for a long period of time. They were on a hike celebrating his visit to the United States. He was about to lead some seminars. So to keep that in mind. So maybe that's why John is off today. So yeah, so let's go a little bit into our material here. So we're going to start from the point in the text where it says, in Tumten Jimpa's translation, therefore, this afflicted ignorance is the force opposing the knowledge of suchness, namely no self. I'd read this last time, but we're going to go into more detail, unpack this time. Does anyone know what page that is in the written edition?
241.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry, 240. My apologies. 240.
240. And if you're searching on the electronic version, you can search for that. Therefore, this afflicted ignorance. Diana, if you're looking through your text there, that's enough. There's no comma. Yeah, it's not like therefore comma. It's just therefore this afflicted ignorance. So what's he saying here? He's when I say he, this is you can take different keys. Lama's own Khapa, through Thupten Jinpa's translation, and we'll also look at Jeffrey Hopkins' translation of this. Just before that, we were talking about Chandrakirti describing grasping at true existence as afflicted ignorance in both his Madhyamaka which is, you could say, entering into the middle way, and in Chandrakirti's commentary on Aryadeva's 400 stanzas. So it's well documented in many places that grasping at true existence is considered to be the, from the Prasangika point of view, the essential element in grasping at a self of persons, grasping at a self of phenomena. And Jinpa's translation said, he stated furthermore that such ignorance has been eliminated by Shravaka and Pratika Buddha Arhats. And he states in his commentary on the 400 stanzas that bodhisattvas have obtained forbearance toward the unborn nature, have also eliminated such ignorance. So that's where we'd finished that last time, that refers to bodhisattvas on the 8th bhumi or above, on the pure bhumis, that they are like Hinayana Arhats in that they have eliminated all ignorance. Okay, so that's sort of the background. So the text is saying, therefore, this afflicted ignorance, so we're using the word afflicted here in contradistinction to non-afflicted ignorance that's being used to refer to the imprints of grasping a true existence that exist on the 8th, 9th, and 10th bhumis. Therefore, this afflicted ignorance is the force opposing the knowledge of suchness. In other words, selflessness or no self, non-self, anatma. The opposite of such knowledge, in turn, should not be understood as a mere absence of knowledge or something like that. It should be understood as a direct opposite, for it reifies or superimposes the person and phenomena as being intrinsically existence. In other words, this is an important point to remember. Ignorance is a misdirected wisdom. So if you look at the defining characteristics of the mental factors, definitions, and so forth, wisdom is a factor that observes phenomena and analyzes them and comes to a correct conclusion. From the Hinayana point of view, there are various levels of ignorance. Sometimes just not knowing something, you could say you're ignorant of it, or just being unaware of some quality. But that's not what's meant here. As is said, it shouldn't be understood as a mere absence of knowledge of sense. It's actually like a wisdom in that it observes something, but comes to the wrong conclusion. So this marigpa or timuk, the factor that's underlying sort of like the basis for our cyclic existence, is misapprehending phenomena. It's a direct opposite. It should be a direct opposite of what? Direct opposite of the knowledge of suchness, of the knowledge of emptiness. For it reifies or superimposes a inherent existence upon persons and phenomena. Then Jinpa's translation continues, understood thus, or in Jeffrey's translation, is taken that way, understood thus, the reification of self-existence of phenomena is considered afflicted ignorance, and the twin grasping at the inherent existence of I and mine constitute the identity view, the view of the transitory collection. So just differentiating here, you can say that from oftentimes Nagarjuna took principally the ignorance that superimposes self-existence of phenomena, afflicted ignorance. That's the root of samsara. And then he's just adding here, and from Chandrakirti's point of view, the root of cyclic existence is the identity view, or the view of the transitory collection, that grasping at the intrinsic existence of I and mine. So in this respect, on how identity view is defined, this Chandrakirti tradition diverges from that of the Abhidharma. Okay, so we'd read that last time. How is that set with everyone? Is it making sense? Yeah? Any confusion, terminology? I didn't say hello to Rachel. Hi, Rachel. Back with us. So then the text continues in German's translation. The Abhidharma tradition is found in the 9th chapter of Vasubandhu's Treasury of Abhidharma, auto commentary. On the other hand, identifies grasping at persons as self-sufficient, substantial realities as the identity view that grasps at I, and the identity view that grasps as mine is identified to be viewing things conceived as mine, belonging to such a person. So the way that the identity view is defined is very different. Yauza, yes. So Abhidharma Kosha, when you say Abhidharma Kosha, generally, if you don't have any other extra words there, it can mean either the Karikas, the verses that Vasubandhu wrote, or his own auto commentary to that. Of course, it could refer to other commentaries to it also. But here, in the auto commentary to his Abhidharma Kosha, Vasubandhu identified from the Sautrantika point of view what what it meant to be the ignorance, grasping at persons as being self-supporting, substantially existent, as being that's the underlying ignorance. And that is the view of the transitory collection. So what's happening there from Vasubandhu's point of view, what you observe are the aggregates themselves, which are impermanent. You take that as your referent, and you conceive the person that's imputed upon them as being self-supporting and substantially existent. And as a corollary of that, because the Buddha mentioned in many sutras that there are two kinds of view of the transitory collection: the view of the transitory collection of the self, and the view of the transitory collection of the mine, M-I-N-E, that which is mine. So from the Vasubandhu's point of view in Abhidharma Kosha, the view of the transitory collection grasping at mine means to the ignorance that thinks that these things like my computer, my mug, which you see many times. I should be hydrating here. I see many of you hydrating as we're going on. Good. Thank you, Rachel. Conceives of them as being objects of possession or use or enjoyment by the self-supporting, substantially existent person. From the Prasangika point of view, that's a very gross sense of the self, the grasping, the view of the transitory collection. So just let me read how Jeffrey translates this, because we still have his translation, alternate translation. So this is on the near the bottom of 244. Taken that way, the consequence schools positing, that means the Prasangika schools presentation that a consciousness superimposing a self of phenomena is an afflictive ignorance, and it's positing that the two apprehensions that I and mine are established by way of their own character, our view of the transitory collection, do not accord with the proponents of manifest knowledge. That's how Jeffrey's translating the, well, how's he translating that? That's D, ngompa, ngompawa, the, I guess the word when he's saying the proponents of manifest knowledge, because the text actually has ngompawa. Ngompa is a short for just taking one syllable of the Abhidharma Kosha in Tibetan, Ngompa Zo, and Ngompawa, the ba at the end is how Jeffrey is adding the word proponents. The system of the proponents of manifest knowledge, as explained in the 9th chapter of Vasubandhu's auto-commentary on the treasury of manifest knowledge, posit a consciousness apprehending that a person substantially exists in the sense of being self-sufficient to be the view of the transitory collection, and that is a misapprehension of the I. And they posit a consciousness apprehending that the mine are objects, that which is mine are the objects controlled by that substantially existent person or enjoyed by that substantially existent person. And that consciousness that apprehends that way is a view of the transitory collection, apprehending the mind, or you could add, he has in brackets, misapprehending the mind. These are greatly at variance with the consequent school's presentation. So those of you who studied several of these things before, this is not new news, but not all of you have studied, and some of you may have forgotten, as I often do. So let me ask you, does it, up to here, does this make sense? Okay, good, Richard. Tell me what doesn't make sense.
I'm not sure I can distinguish a difference. I'm not sure I distinguish a difference between the Prasangika and the Abhidharmika school at all. I just simply, they seem identical to me.
They seem identical. Okay. So what we're, go ahead.
In a few words, what's the difference? Because I don't see any. I'm sorry.
Okay, good question. Okay. Does anyone want to lend a hand? Mikhail, can you explain what the difference is in a few words?
First, I would say that there is a difference in the subtlety of the object of refutation in the two self, two grasping at I. Because in the Prasangika, it's about refuting inherently existing self, while the Abhidharmikas say that it is substantially existent, self-sufficient person, which is a grosser kind of self.
Right. Good explanation. So I'll elaborate again so Richard can hear some other short words. So the object that is being conceived of here should be wrong, right? It's something that doesn't actually exist. A self of persons, or the mine, that which is conceived to be the belonging to that person. Let's take the self of persons. The self of persons does not actually exist the way that it appears. There is a self of persons that's merely imputed, like Richard is merely imputed upon his aggregates. But we're not concerned with that one now. We're talking about the wrong view of the self, the view that's viewing the self from the Prasangika point of view to be inherently existent, or from the Svatantrika Madhyamaka point of view, the self that's considered to be truly existent, even from the Chittamatra point of view. So for the Mahayana tenets, that which is being refuted is not simply that the person is self-supporting, substantially existent. What that actually means is what? Self-supporting, substantially existent. That means it's existing as some kind of findable substance, which itself is truly existent. From the point of view of the Abhidharma, phenomena do truly exist, but there is some misapprehension about them that not when I say them, let's say there's some misapprehension about the self, how the self existing. The self is it truly existent according to Abhidharma, but there's a misapprehension that it is self-supporting and substantially existent. It can be found among the aggregates. There is something that you can find there eventually, which is a substance. From the Prasangika point of view, there is nothing that can be found there. Okay.
That's clear. That's clear.
Okay. Mikhail, what would you like to add?
Is this the fact that for the lower schools, the self can be found, the person can be found in the aggregates? Is that the reason why for the lower schools, Abhidharmikas, for example, they say that the view of the transitory collection looking at I is looking at the aggregates because it can be found there.
Yes, indeed.
While in
And
the Prasangika, the view of the transitory collection is looking at the mere I, right?
right, and we will be elaborating on that as we progress through here. So the object of observation for the Abhidharma is the five aggregates, and you can find a person there. But the crucial point here, when we say when we say the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, there is a person there that's imputedly existent from the Abhidharma point of view, but it appears to be substantially existent as opposed to imputedly existent. Do you remember the difference between those two, Luis? Imputedly existent and substantially existent?
Substantially existent, self-existent versus imputed. Merely imputed.
No, substantially existent here. When we just talk from the Abhidharma point of view, we're not talking about inherent existence. We're saying that impermanent phenomena can either be substantially existent or imputedly existent. Say, for instance, a rosary bead is said to be substantially existent. There's some substance that you can center on there. Whereas a rosary composed of many beads and a string and in a particular configuration is something which is imputedly existent. You can't perceive the imputedly existent entity without apprehending its substratum, the individual beads in the string, or the classic example of an army, a troop of soldiers. An army, or what's another word for that? Battalion, let's say. A battalion is imputed upon a group of soldiers and their armaments, right? Maybe the tanks or horses, whatever historical time you live in. it's something that's imputedly existent. It does exist, but as an imputation. What's the other example? Common example.
Forest.
Forest and trees.
Yeah, forest. A forest. I look out my window, I can see many kind of barren trees out there. You can't perceive the forest without perceiving the group of trees. So the forest is something imputedly existent, whereas the individual trees, according to the Abhidharma, have a different category. They have a certain kind of substance. Just by looking at them, you can perceive them. So they're substantially existent. From the Prasangika point of view, if you looked at the parts of the tree, you would also see that they are also not inherently existent. So that doesn't, Prasangika doesn't accept that same kind of meaning that there are substantially existent phenomena there. Before I go on, who was just had their hand up?
KT.
Oops,
KT.
I did. Thank you. Thanks for taking the question. So this existent findable substance is it found in the elements? I mean, it's like the rosary bead or the tree or the being in the army are findable, but they're still impermanent. But when we say there's this findable substance, like we can hold this substance, and is it something in the elements that we're finding when we break it down, or
No, we don't break it down. It's just by
okay.
just by the fact of let's say, what are we using here? A tree appearing to our eye consciousness, that you can that just by the substance of that tree is said to be substantially existent. So you don't have to understand a lot of parts to understand that, in the same way that you would have to understand the parts of a forest. You'd have to perceive the individual trees to impute the forest. The trees themselves are said to be substantially existent, in that their very substance is sufficient to generate an apprehension of a tree.
Okay, thank you. That helped. Thanks.
So from the Abhidharma point of view, that makes sense. But from the Prasangika point of view, even the tree itself is imputedly existent, right? The tree is imputed upon its parts, its branches, its trunk, its roots, and so forth. So that's always, from a Prasangika point of view, that's a little bit problematic. So let's get back to what Richard's original question was. What are we talking about here? The difference. So from the Abhidharma point of view, the misapprehension of the self is not a misapprehension that the self is inherently existent. That's more subtle. From the Abhidharma point of view, it's a misapprehension that the self is substantially existent, being self-supporting by itself. Simply its appearance is sufficient to give rise to the conception of the self. And within that discussion, from the Abhidharma point of view, we talk about the subtler kind of meaning of that as meaning the sense that the self stands out from the well, let me leave that for a time being. Amy, you have a question? Amy?
Sorry.
Yeah,
I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, but when you asked the question from the Prasangika point of view, what immediately came to mind was dependent arising rather than parts. So I would just ask you, is one are they equal in their arguments against it, or and if dependent arising is superior, why is it superior?
I'm not quite sure where you're coming from. We're talking about this.
I'm talking about substantially existent.
Yeah.
So denying
We haven't gotten to
substantially
the
existent
subtlety.
from Prasangika.
We haven't gotten to the subtlety of that yet. We're talking about just the difference between the view of the transitory collection from the Abhidharma point of view and the view of the transitory collection from the Prasangika point of view. So they'll be coming very quickly. So just be patient. Okay.
Okay.
Do the Abhidharma people claim that you can't break it down further from that substance of a tree? You're talking about a tree in a forest, like, are they saying you can't break that tree down even further?
Same thing with a flower, let's say, like a similar tree. Flower has petals and pistil and stem and different things like this. Yet a flower is said to be an object of eye consciousness for them, whereas a garden is not an object of eye consciousness. A garden is something which is imputedly existent and is an object of mental consciousness. So there's all of these kind of things are intertwined, but from the point that Lama Tsongkhapa is making here. So he says the Abhidharma tradition is found in the 9th chapter. So what does that mean? Usually when Vasubandhu wrote the Abhidharma Kosha auto commentary, his Bhasham, how many chapters did it have? Does anyone know? Suvash, do you know the Abhidharma Kosha Bhasham? Mikhail? Amy knows, or no? She still has her hand up. Okay, I thought maybe you had. You know, it only had 8 chapters, and in fact, the Abhidharma Kosha Karikas only had 8 chapters. It was only subsequently that he wrote a 9th chapter talking about the view of the transitory collection and self-supporting substantially existent person and so forth. So that's when it says here, as found in the 9th chapter of Vasubandhu's Treasury of Abhidharma auto commentary. So originally the Abhidharma Kosha Karikas only had 8 chapters, and its commentary, the Bhasham that came out, had 8 chapters. And then subsequent to that, sometime later, Vasubandhu wrote a 9th chapter. So that's what we're talking about there. So in that, it identifies the transitory view, the view of the transitory collection, the sort of what do we call it? Jiksuk Latawa, one of the, you know what we're talking about when we talk about the 6 root afflictions. Do you know what the 6 root afflictions are, Richard?
They're ignorance, aversion, desire. There are synonyms. Then I think there's pride. There's 3 others, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what they are.
Okay, so that there are only 6. So there's not. So you got ignorance, desire or attachment, anger or repulsion, pride, and then view, afflict. Sorry. What else? What is there? What's the other one? Doubt, and then afflicted view. That makes 6, right? If you get my other thumb up here. So there's 6 root afflictions. One of them is afflicted doubt. One of them is pride. But the 6th one is called view. And if that is expanded, there are how many views? Don knows. Get the right mouse. There are 5 more. So that 6th one is divided into 5. So you have, sometimes it's said that there are 10 root afflictions, if you, 5 of which are views, 5 of which are non-views. Okay, so the first and most important of the views, afflicted views, is the view of the transitory collection. Okay, the other ones, the other of the views elaborate upon that, are based upon that. So between that view of the transitory collection and ignorance, the first that Richard pointed out, sometimes it's called marikpa, sometimes this is called timuk or moha. They have slightly different meanings, but here in Abhidharma Kosha, Vasubandhu identified the view of the transitory collection as a view that grasps at the person that is imputed upon the 5 aggregates as being self-supporting, substantially existent, being something that is a substance that doesn't have to be imputed upon its parts, that misapprehension. Does that help a little bit, Richard?
That contrasts with the Prasangika view of the transitory collection.
Right, as contradiction. So, in what way is the Prasangika view that's coming up? But just to sort of pacify Amy's inquisitive mind, what's the difference from the Prasangika point of view? You are not viewing the 5 aggregates and conceiving them to be a self-supporting, substantially existent person, but you are viewing the mere person, the mere I that's imputed upon the aggregates, and conceiving that to be inherently existent. So we talked about this in detail when we talked about low rig,
Please
but
say that again.
in the present, from Prasangika point of view, what you are actually, the view of the transitory collection is a consciousness that is observing the mere I and conceiving it to be inherently existent. Now that poses a lot of philosophical difficulties, because let's say, does that mean that the view of the transitory collection actually realizes the mere I? No, it's referring to it. That means that's in its conceptual machinations and its conceptual framework. It's just referring to the I without actually identifying it, which is actually the conventionally existent I. How does a conventionally existent I exist? As a mere imputation. So it's observing that and conceiving it to be inherently existent.
And by contrast, how does the Abhidharma perceive the Abhidharma doesn't perceive a mere I?
The Abhidharma is not referring to the mere I. In fact,
Okay.
it doesn't even use the terminology mere I. It's because for them the I is substantially existent. Let's say the I is not substantially existent. The I is truly existent. There is an I there, and that the misconception is that I is a self-supporting, substantially existent entity.
Okay, I think I got it now. Okay.
From the Prasangika point of view, the view of the transitory collection, viewing mine, M-I-N-E, that is that which belongs to you, the sense of mind, like this is my cup and so forth. For them, from the Abhidharma, it doesn't have any more subtlety than that. It just says things that are mine are things that are considered to be mine, to be used by that self-supporting, substantially existent person. Whereas the Prasangika has a much, much subtler point of view than that. The mine is also an ignorant consciousness that is a subsidiary of the view of grasping to self, to the self, and it is conceiving the phenomena to be to have an inherent existence of their own. Well, we'll get to that. Let's leave it at that right now. So let's just read that sentence again. The Abhidharma tradition is found in the 9th chapter, the subsidiary chapter to Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha Bhasham. On the other hand, identifies grasping to persons as self-sufficient substantial realities as the view of the transitory collection, the identity view that grasps that I, and identifies the identity view that grasps that mind to be viewing things conceived as mine belonging to such a person. So the way the identity view is defined is very different. Okay, we've got a gross presentation of that. Let's go into more detail. So then Jimpa's translation continues. Now, although the grasping at persons as self-sufficient substantial realities is found in those whose minds are not tempered by philosophical thinking, that are not affected by tenets. So when we talk about the different kinds of afflictions, right, we talk about those that are intellectually formed, or as Jimpa says here, tempered by philosophical thinking, and those that are innate. So although the grasping is self-supporting substantial existence of persons, that can have one of two kinds. It can be an innate grasping that has come about from beginningless time and is still in our mind stream, that doesn't need any kind of philosophical views. It can arise also because of hearing certain kind of tenets explaining that, like say the Vaibhashika tenets or something. So let's see here. Jeffrey Hopkins says, apprehension that persons substantially exist in the sense of being self-sufficient, so self-supporting, substantially existent, also exists among those whose awarenesses are not affected by tenets. That means that there is an innate version to that. But according to the consequent school, but according to Prasangika, apprehension that persons exist as other than the mental and physical aggregates, in the sense of having a character discordant with them, does not exist among those whose awarenesses are not affected by tenets. Thus, views holding to extremes are also of two types, innate and artificial. So we have to weave back in Jimpa's translation of that. We hadn't finished that. So he said, now, although grasping at persons as self-sufficient substantial realities is found in those whose minds are not tempered by philosophical tenets, grasping at persons as entities separate from the aggregates with distinct characteristics does not exist in those whose minds are not conditioned by philosophy. So even with respect to views grasping at extremes, there are two types. So now, again, getting into some, obviously easily to confuse. What's being talked about here? Does anyone think that they have grokked the meaning? Suvash, do you have a feeling you know what that means?
I don't know what's coming up, but I think you've clarified where we are up to now.
Yeah. Okay. So this last phrase here, this last I read Jeffrey's and in Jimba's translation of this. So basically what he's saying is that for the lower tenets, the grasping at a person of being self-supporting, substantially existent has two types: innate and intellectually formed. Intellectually formed being what Jempa says, minds that are tempered by philosophical thinking. So it does have an innate form. So it is found in those whose minds are not tempered by philosophical thinking. That's one statement. Then in addition to that, he's saying that on the other hand, the view of, remember when we talked about if you broke down the six delusions, the sixth one being views into five, you had 10 afflictions, 5 afflicted klesha, and five views and 5 non-views, you could say. So of the 5 views, the first one was a view of the transitory collection. One of the other views is a view of extremes, the view grasping to extremes. So here he's talking about that one, grasping at persons as entities separate from the aggregates. So what kind of conception would that be? That would be like thinking that the person, like in some of the Vedic traditions, you say some of the Hindu schools, the Vedic traditions, view that the self is something divorced from the aggregates. It's separate from the aggregates, and it sort of looks at the aggregates and thinks they're mine, right? Grasping at a person's as entities separate from the aggregates with distinct characteristics. So this, from the point of view of some Hindu schools or some Vedic schools, is that the I is of a diverse character, separate from the aggregates. Maybe is that Sagan?
Yeah, that's the same as the Christian view or the soul.
I was just going to say, all right. So when the in the Christian philosophical tradition, when you talk about I or the soul seems to be something which is separate from the aggregates, right? Because when the aggregates are destroyed, the soul still exists. Of course, you could argue in Prasangika, when the aggregates are destroyed, does the I still exist, Sean?
It depends on what you're calling the I.
Or the aggregate.
If I'm talking about Sean, then Sean will no longer exist.
Yeah, Sean no longer exists. Almost in the Christian tradition, almost like that name is attributed to the soul, right? Almost, and continuing on. So that's what's being talked about here. Grasping at persons as entities separate from the aggregates with distinct characteristics does not exist in those whose minds are not conditioned by philosophy. So in other words, there is no innate apprehension of a self, of persons, as being separate from the aggregates. There's no innate grasping like that. The only kind of grasping like that is something that's generated having heard arguments, whether you call it philosophical tenets or other kinds of arguments, or your mother or priest telling you that there's a soul or a self that's separate from your aggregates. So even with respect to views grasping at extremes, there are two types. So what does his note mean there? I think I got the wrong note number there. What was that? That's 439, right? So 439 is, no? 439 says, Tsongkhapa is saying that just as there are two types of identity view, one defined uniquely by Chandrakirti here. So that means the view of the view of the transitory collection, meaning viewing the self as being inherently existent. And another view defined by Abhidharma as being the self as being self-supporting, substantially existent, the lack of that. There would be likewise two types when it comes to defining the extreme views as well. Let's see, how does Jeffrey say that? Jeffrey himself doesn't give a note. He just says, thus views holding to extremes also are also of two types. Innate and intellectually formed. So I think Jimpa's note is different than Jeffrey's take on that, right? You're nodding, Mikhail?
Yeah, it doesn't mean the same thing, but I don't understand what Thupten Jinpa is saying in this thought. I don't get it.
I think Jimpa is saying that just as there are two views of the transitory collection, Prasangika view or the Abhidharma view, there are two views of the extreme view, the Prasangika view and the Abhidharma kind of definition of extreme view. That's what Chimpa is saying. But what Jeffrey Hopkins has put in brackets on page 245 there, right? Where is that? Okay. Thus, this is just about in the middle of the page, just a little above the middle of the page, just before the indentation where it says question. So it says, thus, views holding to extremes are also of two types. There are views holding to extremes which are innate, and there are views that are holding to extremes that are intellectually formed or artificial, depending on having heard something this lifetime, some arguments, even your own ruminations. It doesn't have to be that you heard it from others. It just can mean that you come to some kind of conclusion like that. Is that making sense? Rachel, what do you think?
Sorry, my head's just starting to go fuzzy about the fact that, okay, in the view of the transitory collection, it's the differences are between the Prasangika and the Abhidharma views. Right. Yes. But now what I'm hearing, I thought originally I was hearing that the view of the extremes, well, there were two types within the Abhidharma itself, not between the Prasangika and the Abhidharma views of what that meant. Because within the Abhidharma view of the extremes, it would be, some of those would be innate, and some of them would be intellectually formed. But something you just said told me otherwise, and so now I'm a little confused.
This is what Jeffrey Hopkins takes from that sentence. Jimpa's note seems to indicate that he thinks it's when it says, so even with respect to views grasping extremes, there are two types, or as Jeffrey translates, thus views holding to extremes are also of two types. They both have essentially the same translation of that sentence, but they unpack it differently. Jimpa's note 439 says, Tsongkhapa is saying that just as there are two types of identity view, and the two types he's talking about, one from the Prasangika point of view and one from the Abhidharma point of view, there would likewise be two types when it comes to defining the extreme view as well, so that there would be an extreme view from the Prasangika point of view and an extreme view from the Abhidharma point of view. But that's not how Jeffrey Hopkins takes that. He's taking that the word two, thus views holding to extremes are also of two types. He's taking that to mean that views holding to extremes are either innate, that is, just like the innate ignorance that we've had in our minds since beginningless time that doesn't have to be taught to us, and intellectually formed or artificial. That seems to be in accordance, Jeffries seems to be in accordance with this paragraph, because this paragraph is saying apprehension that persons substantially exist in the sense of being self-sufficient also exists among those whose awareness are not affected by tenets, so that there is an innate form of grasping to the self-supporting substantially existent person, as opposed to the artificial or intellectually formed. But according to the Prasangika, apprehension that persons exist as other than their mental and physical aggregates, in the sense of having, say, being a different entity from them, having different characteristics of them, like the soul or the self that's conceived by some of the Vedic schools, that does not have an intellect, that does not have an innate form. So this whole paragraph is talking about the difference between innate and intellectually formed. So I tend to think that Jeffrey's take on the meaning here is more in accordance with what Lama Tsongkhapa is talking about. Amy, do you have your own view?
No, just a question. After you pass the path of seeing, where the intellectually views are dropped,
right? Mm-hmm.
Then is it? So I don't know what's coming, and maybe it is coming. And is it just this view of the extremes that is what happens at each of the levels of the bhumis, or is it all of the different views that you mentioned, the 5 views?
The 5 views. Okay, so some of the views. Let's say here it says, as in Jeffrey's commentary here, it says, thus views holding to extremes are also of 2 types. So even extreme view has 2 types. There is an innate view of extremes. There's an innate view of the transitory collection. I can't remember. I think maybe views of improper morality as being supreme, maybe that there's not an innate view of that. Of the 5 views, some of them have both innate and artificial, innate or intellectually formed, like the view of the transitory collection and extreme views.
Right.
And I can't remember of the other 3. I think at least one of them, or maybe 2 of them, they do not have an innate form. So you wouldn't have 5 after the path of seeing, as you rightly remember, and as you pointed out, there's no longer intellectually formed views. They've all been abandoned. So some of those views, there wouldn't be 5 views still existing after the path of seeing, when you're on the path of meditation and so forth.
So it's just the transitory collection and the extremes that we've so far come to.
That those are the 2 that have been identified here, but I can't remember of the rest. I'll check for our discussion group on Monday and for class next time. Good for that. Okay, making sense now? KT, how are you doing? You're in the dark there, so I can't see your face quite as well.
Okay, my video camera's got something wrong with it, so I have like a partial thing going.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Are you making sense?
Mostly I gotta ponder some more, read it again. Yes.
Nadine, making sense?
Yes, thank you. Did I understand correctly that also for Prasangika, the identity view has an innate form and an intellectually acquired one? Also for
So the identity view, which I also translate as the view of the transitory collection, that is of two types, innate and intellectually formed. So the intellectually formed or artificial form of that is abandoned in the path of seeing. In that first moment of the path of seeing, the intellectually formed view of the transitory collection is abandoned, but the subtle form, the innate form, continues on and is not abandoned until when? Nadine.
end of the seventh Bhumi.
Beginning of the eighth Bhumi, yeah. When you achieve the eighth Bhumi, you have abandoned that. Okay. So with regard to that, just as an aside and in sort of elaboration of some questions that Mikhail had been asking about self-cherishing thought. Okay. So what is self-cherishing thought? We've been told that the self-cherishing thought is not abandoned until when, Mikhail?
Buddhahood? I don't know.
Not abandoned until the eighth Bhumi.
Eighth Bhumi?
Yeah, until just like the afflictions. So there's a question, well, anyway, like this. There's a question, is this. What is the self-cherishing thought? Rang Chenzen Gilo. Suvash, have you investigated this question? Have you thought about this?
Well, I think self-cherishing is self-aggrandizement, making oneself. Looking after oneself all the time.
Yeah, self-aggrandizement. I'm not sure what that means. What is that? What does aggrandizement mean? Who's a grammarian? Well, let's ask Diana. She's our resident grammarian. What does self-aggrandizement mean?
To make oneself seem grander, larger, more important, which may or may not have been what he meant to say.
Yeah.
No, that's it. That's it. Yeah.
So much.
But that almost sounds like self-grasping. There's a difference between self-cherishing and self-grasping, right?
Right. So self-grasping is the one that's deeper. Self-cherishing is, at least from my understanding, self-cherishing is the one that's going to fall before self-grasping falls.
Okay, from your point of view.
Yes, from my point of view, correct.
From Gompa Rapsel's point of view, from Lama Tsong Khapa's point of view, self-cherishing is not abandoned until the eighth Bhumi. So it seems to be related with the afflictions. It is not generally, when you talk about the klesha, the 51 klesha, the 6 root delusions and so forth, the 20 secondary minds and so forth. It is not found anywhere there. So there's a question as, so first of all, from Lama Tsong Khapa's point of view, it is abandoned on the eighth Bhumi. By the eighth Bhumi, like the afflictions, it's been abandoned. So it itself, that Rang Chenzen Gilo, the self-cherishing, is not an obstruction to omniscience, first of all. That's something to keep in mind.
But I heard that the Hinayana Arhats still have some self-cherishing thought.
Okay, so here's the second point. Do the Hinayana Arhats while they're still alive in a human body. Of course, their mind, they'll still have a continuity from the Prasangika point of view. Their mind stream continues. So while they're alive, do they still have self-cherishing?
I mean,
Amy's
they are not striving
saying
for.
yes. I don't see any other heads nodding. What do you say? Don, what do you say? Yes. Okay, that's good. What would you think, Diana? Do the Hinayana Arhats still have self-cherishing?
Logically, from what you've just said, it seems like not, but to me, it feels completely counterintuitive. I can't cherish myself unless it presupposes I believe I have a self or am a self.
Well, that would go along with that they do not have self-cherishing thought, right? Well, it's a little bit different. So, Minto, just one second. Let me just say a little bit more. So generally, so if we take it this way, that self-cherishing thought is abandoned on the eighth bhumi, that would mean that the Hinayana Arhats do not have self-cherishing thought. So what is self-cherishing thought an obstacle to? It's not considered to be, well, let's say self-cherishing thought. Self-cherishing thought is thought to be an obstacle to generating bodhicitta, right? At the beginning. So once you've generated bodhicitta and you're on the path of accumulation, self-cherishing thought is not totally eliminated. You've eliminated some gross version of the self-cherishing thought that had prevented you from entering into the Mahayana path, because the self-cherishing thought is something that diminishes your concern for others. It's not so much concerned with aiming for enlightenment or liberation, that dichotomy. Self-cherishing thought is basically whether you're, and the balance right now, all of us cherish ourself more than others. No matter, I don't mean to be demeaning you, but I'm the same. You know, we cherish ourselves more than others. And so that becomes an obstacle to developing bodhicitta and entering into the Mahayana path. It's not an obstacle associated with liberation. So the Hinayana Arhats, they have abandoned, when they've become Arhats, they've abandoned self-cherishing from this point of view, but they still have the mind that is seeking their own liberation. So the phrase in Tibetan, I can, on Monday we'll have a PDF for you. It's Rangni. Rangni means oneself. So it's oneself alone. Rangni Bashik, only. Rangni Bashiki Chedu, for the sake of only oneself alone. Tarpa Dondu Nergi Lo. It's a lo, an awareness which is seeking, dondu ner, liberation for the sake of oneself alone. So that is another aspect of what the Hinayana practitioners have. Once they generate spontaneous renunciation, what is motivating them is not so much self-cherishing thought, although that's involved in it. It's this awareness or mind that is seeking liberation for the sake of oneself alone. Does that make sense? This is a phrase that's found in the Tibetan textbooks of Drepung University of what's his name? Not Peldon Drakpa. Who was it? Do you know, Mikhail, the Yiksha writers of Dremung?
Jason Chucky Yeltsin? No.
No, that's Sarah Jane. Okay. Anyway, I have the name.
Khapa.
No, that's content. Okay, doesn't matter. I was going to say Peldon Drakpa, but I can't remember Jason. Anyway, so in the textbooks, that's what's motivating the Hinayana Arhats, a mind that's seeking liberation for themselves alone. That's what's motivating them. So for oneself alone means that you are obviously, the self-cherishing thought affects that to some degree, but that's the mind that keeps on going within their mind stream up to and including arhatship. Even when they've become arhats, they still have that mind that prevents them from entering into the Mahayana path. It's not self-cherishing thought that prevents them from entering into the Mahayana path. Making sense? Okay, something to think about. Pension Sonam Drakpa. Sonam Drakpa. Pension Sonam Drakpa is the name of the Dremung Yiksha writer whose text has that desire for one's own liberation. So is that Hinayana desire for one's own liberation, is that an obstruction to omniscience? It's not an obstruction to liberation because they've already become liberated, but they still have that mind. I'm not sure if Richard is tuned out. Are you still following, Richard?
I am. I think. Is it an obstruction to liberation, to omniscience? I don't see how it could be, because you need to be liberated first in order to gain omniscience. So a desire for liberation will eventually get you liberated, and then once you're liberated, you no longer have the desire to be liberated because it's irrelevant, and therefore you can go on to omniscience.
Okay, good. Okay, you're following.
That's at least how it works out for my logic.
That's good reasoning. So in Pension Sonam Drakpa's text, it says, desire for one's own liberation, this long phrase that we said, the awareness that is striving for liberation for the sake of oneself alone, that is not an obstruction to omniscience because it is a path. It is a path. So anything that is a path that leads you somewhere, even though it leads you to that inferior goal, is not an obstruction to liberation. Okay.
Do you mean obstruction to knowledge?
Yeah. Conditions.
Yeah, it's not obstruction to knowledge, right? It's not obstruction to omniscience. Sorry. Thank you for the correction. I misspoke. Mintu, I've let your iconic hand stand there. It must be tired by now. So what's your intake? What's your take on this? You're muted, so we're missing your.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Now we can, yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, I think that they are actually pretty cool, pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But I think what most people, what a lot of us don't realize, is that the state where people achieve cessation of volitions as defined in the arhatship is actually pretty strange.
Say that again. The point. What did you say? The point. What?
Cessation of volitional consciousness.
Cessation of volitional consciousness.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but something like, when I remember in the Pali canon, they say that the arhatship, when it's realized, people actually stop like the volition to some degree, you know, stop like wanting this or that. And so it's actually pretty strange because in the Theravada canon, there are many arhat who have achieved arhatships, but then they still have some personal problems. Like I think one of the arhat actually has a slight verbal tic where because he was born many lifetimes as a high caste person, so whenever he see a low caste person, he says something like hello low caste person, or hello, you know, inferior person.
Right,
And
right.
yeah, and despite, you know, the lay people complaining to the Buddha and say, wow, this person is insulting us, Buddha say, well, he doesn't have intention, it just, you know, he used to it. But he was, and he was not able to sort of like correct that behavior somehow. It's a kind of like a strange
Right, right. So that
sense.
So good to mention that. So that is what is, when we talk about those things that are obstructions to omniscience, that is categorized in there. That's called, well, I can't remember the Tibetan name right now. Essentially, there are certain kinds of behavior that one might jump like a monkey inadvertently. One might say to people, like you say, "Oh, you low caste," or as Jeffrey Hopkins put it in his translation, he would say you might call someone, quote, a bitch, unquote. You know, it's just sort of, even though you've become liberated, even though you're an arhat, because you still have the obstructions to omniscience that have not been removed. And some of them cause these kinds of abhorrent kind of behavior like that. Suvash, what do you think? What are you thinking?
Venerable George, could you please, the comparison between self-cherishing and self-grasping, right? I mean, we talk a lot about self-grasping, but here we are talking about self-cherishing. Now, the example that you mentioned, right? The desire to seek Buddhahood, right? The arhat seeking Buddhahood for, or seeking arhatship for oneself. I mean, I would have thought that there's much more to self-cherishing than that example, right? And
Yeah, that's not self-cherishing. That's not self-cherishing. That particular, so there are two kinds of mind here. One is a self-cherishing thought, which is an obstacle to generating bodhicitta. So even the arhats, if they still have self-cherishing, they've eliminated self-cherishing thought. So that's not the only obstacle to generating bodhicitta. There's still the obstacle that the mind that's desiring for liberation for the sake of oneself alone, that's what's propelling them while they're still alive, they're still thinking. That's something that they've had since the beginning of their quest, whether it be 3 lifetimes ago or 16 lifetimes ago, and that quest for arhatship. That's what's been propelling them, that enormous kind of sense of renunciation from the beginning that sees, on one hand, cyclic existence as being like a cesspool, which we all have a certain identification with that. And on the other hand, seeing liberation as something that is possible and desiring that. That's what's in Tibetan is called tardo, which is a very typical Tibetan name. I remember, Rachel, you remember when Geshe Tardo at the University of Virginia, when you were down there, you were in that, weren't you there? No? Oh, I thought you were there. Okay. Anyway,
I mean, okay. I mean that helps to clarify, because I had I had loaded many senses onto that term, and I think the way that you put self-cherishing over here, So I mean, you know, the point that I was making earlier, self-grasping versus self-cherishing. It doesn't self-grasping underlie self-cherishing?
Yeah, the fact that one is grasping to oneself is a contributing factor for self-cherishing. But self-cherishing is something that can start to be, say, for instance, you cherish yourself more than others, self-cherishing. So that's what prevents you from entering into the Mahayana path, prevents you from thinking of compassion for others as worthy of your attention, prevents you from developing empathy for others because that's their problem. You know, why should I be concerned with that? That's self-cherishing thinking. So that's one of the faults in the Lojong, the training of the mind. What one tries to see the disadvantages of self-cherishing thought and the advantage of cherishing others. The opposite of self-cherishing thought is cherishing others more than oneself. And that particular frame of mind is enhanced by the particular practice of equalizing and exchanging oneself and others. The practice of develop bodhicitta that's more fitted, more suited to those of superior intellect. So we've got several factors here that you have to try to distinguish: self-grasping, self-cherishing thought, and the thought that seeks liberation for oneself alone. Okay, let's leave it at that because we're going to take a quick break, which I think Anna is what's going to say. Let's take a short break here. I'll keep my microphone on, and if any of you want to debate about this, the difference between these three. So we're 3 or 4 things. So we're talking about self-grasping, which is relevant here to what we're talking about in Gompa Rapso. Self-cherishing thought, which I brought up, is self-cherishing thought is not an obstruction to omniscience. So what is it? And the mind that is seeking liberation for oneself alone, which even the arhats have when they've achieved that state. Okay, so we're going to take a little short break. If you would like to get some tea or if you need a bathroom break, we'll be back after that. So Anna, if you would like to turn off the recording. Hi, we're back. Doris has a question.
I did, Venerable. You answered it partially. I asked you for your mantra a couple years ago, and I ended up with the understanding not to put Vajradhara in your mantra because you didn't consider yourself to be a tantric guru. So now I need clarification.
No, this is just talking, that's just talking from the tantric point of view, if one is practicing tantra. So leave that aside for the time being. We'll discuss that separately.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mikhail?
Yeah, could you just cite where I could find, in which text could I find more information about the self-cherishing thought in Tibetan?
Okay, so this question is very interesting. So in the debating courtyards, some of my friends, especially my friend Jeremy Manheim, who's studied at the Seni Lapta for many years. He's now working on the 84,000 project. I think I've mentioned him several times. So Jeremy mentioned that in the debating courtyard, they realized that you can't find a definition of self-cherishing thought anywhere in the sutras, in the shastras, or in the textbooks in general. So it comes down to using logic for yourself, to use logic to try to identify that. So according to the different textbook writers, there are different takes on it. So what we were talking about before, so from the point of view of Panchen Sonam Drakpa, who was the textbook writer for Drebung, the arhats have abandoned self-cherishing thought. And that's also the position of the abbot of the Seni Lapta, the dialectic school in Dharamsala, who was assassinated many years ago. So his view, he wrote a text called, what was it, Semgi Dashin. So the mind, which is like the moon, or the moon-like mind, or something like that. He said that self-cherishing thought was dakla chakpe chak. So that it was attachment to oneself. Let's say dakla chakpe chak. So it's a desire which is attachment to oneself, and therefore it was a klesha avarana. It was a nyundip. It was an obstruction to liberation. So that's what we got from Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary also, that it wasn't that the self-cherishing thought wasn't totally abandoned until the eighth bhumi. So that would also be abandoned by the arhats. So from their point of view, self-cherishing thought is a obstruction to liberation. The arhats have abandoned it, but they still have that other component. So it's not just self-cherishing thought that they had from the beginning, but they also had this thought, the mind that's seeking liberation for themselves alone. Do the bodhisattvas have desire for liberation for themselves alone, Ron? Do you think? No. No need to unmute. They're seeking that from their point of view, from the bodhisattva's point of view, that's an obstruction that prevents them from entering into the Mahayana path. So from their point of view, but as I mentioned before, it's not considered the consciousness, the mind that's desiring liberation for oneself alone is not considered to be a shedip, an obstruction to omniscience, because it's a path. It's a path that leads you somewhere that the Buddha actually propagated, to generate that mind, to achieve liberation. Okay, so I just wanted to pass that on, to share that. So here we are in Gompa Ravsal. So we just finished this sentence, this paragraph that ended with note 439, right? We said, now, although the grasping at persons as self-sufficient substantial realities is found in those whose minds are not tempered by philosophical thinking, grasping at persons as entities separate from the aggregates with distinct characteristics does not exist in those minds who are not conditioned by philosophy. There's no innate view like that. And so Jimpa's text says, so even with respect to views grasping at extremes, there are two types. And you got my take on it, that I preferred Jeffrey Hopkins' take there, that where is that? That it is referring to innate, or the two, meaning innate or intellectually formed. Where is that? Yeah, so thus views holding to extremes are also of two types, innate and artificial. Okay, so that's where we were. So now there's a question. In Jeffrey's text, he actually says question. In Jimpa's text, he just says, if this is so, one might ask. So that's sort of like we say in Tibetan, in the Tibetan text, they end with Shena. If someone says, one might ask, how would you prove to those who maintain persons and phenomena to exist through their intrinsic characteristics? How would you prove to them? What persons are those? Who maintain, or Jeffrey says, how does one prove to those whose position is that persons and phenomena are established by way of their own character, how do you prove that grasping at such constitutes afflicted ignorance and represents the twofold grasping at self-existence? Or as Jeffrey says, how does one prove to those whose position is that persons and phenomena are established by way of their own character? So that would mean everyone below Prasangika, right? Because that phenomena are established by their own character, at least conventionally, the Svatantrikas and so forth. How do you prove that those apprehensions, apprehending phenomena to be inherently existent, are afflicted ignorance, and that that those apprehensions are the two apprehensions of self? That is, that you apprehend the self of phenomena and the self of persons, in the sense of apprehending the self, the person to be inherently existent, and apprehending phenomena to be inherently existent. Okay. So what's the answer? So in Jimba's text, he has reply, and in Jeffrey's text, he says answer. So Jimba's text says reply. Now, insofar as intrinsic existence, inherent existence of persons and phenomena is concerned, this will be or is negated by those reasonings that refute it. It almost sounds like obvious, right? If you have reasonings that refute it, they will be negated. The intrinsic existence of persons and phenomena. From everyone below Prasangika, that is assumed to exist, that there is an intrinsic or inherent existence of phenomena from their own side, at least conventionally, right? Following? Mikhail, you following? Yeah.
I think so. Thank you.
So that kind of intrinsic existence is refuted by the reasonings, or is negated by the reasonings that refute it. That is to say, the reasonings that we're going over now in this, when we're talking about that phenomena are not produced from self, from other, from both or neither. We're still on the both. We're still on not, refuting generation from other. That's still the section that we're talking about. All of this is all been talking about that. So once the intrinsic existence or inherent existence is refuted, the inherent existence will be negated. Okay, whatever that means. And when this happens, when that's negated, apprehending things in such terms, to believe that phenomena are inherently existent, will come to be established as erroneous. You will understand that that is a wrong mind that you've had before, let's say in the Svatantrika path and below, all of the people, you will understand that the mind that grasps that phenomena as being inherently existent is a wrong consciousness, is erroneous with respect to its apprehended object, or with respect to its conceived object. Making sense? So Jeffrey's translation says, the inherent establishment of persons and other phenomena is negated by the reasonings refuting this. And at that time, it is established that a consciousness apprehending such is a consciousness apprehending true existence that is mistaken with respect to its conceived object. Okay, so when we talk about conceived object, what does that mean? Remember the different kinds of objects. When you're talking about conceived object, are you talking about, do you have a conceived object for perceptions of eye consciousness? Richard? Yeah. Does I consciousness have a conceived object?
I'm not sure. Let me just think about it for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, doesn't it? Wait a minute. An I consciousness simply perceives an object. A conception is a little bit further down the pipe.
Right. Good way of saying further down the pipe. So conceived object only takes place in conceptions, which only take place in the mental consciousness, right?
Right.
So-
Yeah. That's what I meant. I couldn't think of the words. That's why
No.
into the plumbing analogy.
Your analysis was right, and you were able to derive that from your knowledge and thinking about the logic of it. So, what did Jeffrey say here? It is so that grasping at true existence is a mistaken consciousness with respect to its conceived object. That means, so you have the appearing object to that mental consciousness of inherent existence, but that's just a mental image, right? What you were conceiving that to be, you were assenting to that and thinking that there actually is that mental action, that mental image actually refers to something that actually exists, inherent existence. That's a mistaken consciousness. It's mistaken with respect to its conceived object. Is it mistaken with respect to its appearing object, Nadine?
I'm not sure because even for sense consciousness, inherent existence appears.
Yeah, we're talking about mental consciousness now.
Yeah, then it's wrong. Yes.
So, hold on. So as we're saying here, the conceived object does not exist. That is the true existence that is being conceived. So there is a mental image of that true existence. Does that is that consciousness mistaken with respect to that?
The mental image exists, like the horns of a rabbit.
The mental image exists, but is the mind mistaken with respect to that?
Not sure.
All conceptual consciousnesses are mistaken in that they mistake the mental image to be the object itself. So they're all mistaken consciousnesses. Okay, so this is just some background, just to fill in. So Jeffrey Hopkins' translation says, then he continues. I'll read Jeffrey's first. Also, when this is established, that consciousness grasping at inherent existence is mistaken, when this is established, it is established that the apprehensions of the two, persons and phenomena, as being truly existent, are the two apprehensions of self. One would come to understand, let's say from the, if you were able to lead a Sautrantika up to this point, and they would have understood that grasping to true existence and inherent existence was mistaken consciousness, it would be established that the two graspings to persons and phenomena as being truly existent are the two graspings to self, grasping to self of phenomena, grasping to self of persons. When those are established, it is established that the apprehension of true existence is the grasping to true existence is the discordant faction. You have to check what the Tibetan is here. Is the distorted faction that is the contrary of knowledge of suchness. So what's that saying? It is that this grasping to true existence is that which is not just the lack of knowledge of how phenomena actually exist. It's actually discordant with it. It is actually opposing the realization of the emptiness of true existence, whereby it is established that it is ignorance. Okay, long sentence. Suvash, what do you think?
Venerable George, this paragraph, multiple times it talks about true existence. And I'm wondering, is there a difference? Should I assume that true existence is synonymous with innate existence, with swabhava? Can I use them interchangeably, or is true existence something different from innate existence?
So innate existence or inherent existence, I think.
Correct, yeah.
So remember, from the lower tenets have different views on this. Everyone says that phenomena, let's say the Hinayana schools say that all phenomena are truly existent. All phenomena are truly existent. The Hinayana schools. There is something real, tangible out there. Things appear, the way that things appear does accord with the way that they exist. The Mahayana school, starting with Chittamatra, saying that phenomena are not truly existent, but they're varying views of what true existence means. For Chittamatra, what is meant by that phenomena are truly existent in the sense of what? They lack true existence in what sense?
They lack it in the sense that it's not external. It's mind.
Right. So there's a grosser view. In the Svatantrika, they say that phenomena are empty of true existence, but they still have inherent existence conventionally. Right?
Okay.
So
okay, yeah.
For the Prasangika says true existence and inherent existence are actually theoretical synonyms, hypothetical synonyms. They can't be called synonyms because what? For two things to be synonyms, they have to exist. And true existence and inherent existence, neither of them exist, but they are hypothetical synonyms. They're, to someone's mind, you might, for Prasangika, they're referring to the same thing. There's no difference in subtlety between inherent existence and true existence. But for lower schools, there is a gradation of subtlety there. Okay. So let me catch up then in Thupten Jinpa's translation. So Thupten Jinpa's translation says, now insofar as intrinsic existence of persons and phenomena is concerned, this will be negated by those reasonings that refute it. So that's the section that we're on, refuting inherent existence of production and therefore inherent existence of phenomena. And when this happens, apprehending things in such terms as true existence will come to be established as erroneous with respect to its apprehended object, its conceived object. We'll understand that that's a mistaken consciousness with respect to its conceived object. So that conception is a wrong conception. When this is established, then grasping of the true existence of persons and phenomena will come to be confirmed as constituting the twofold grasping at self-existence. Once these facts are confirmed, then grasping at true existence will come to be affirmed as the force directly opposing the knowledge of suchness, and as such, and in that way, it will be understood to be a form of ignorance. Okay. Then Jinpa's translation continues. Since it can be shown that as long as such ignorance that grasps that intrinsic existence, inherent existence, as long as that ignorance does not cease, the view of the transitory collection, the identity view also will not come to an end. This leads to the conclusion that such ignorance is indeed an afflicted ignorance. Thus, it is critical to understand how to define, thus, it is critical to understand how to define Chandrakirti's unique presentation of the afflictions. Or as Jeffrey finishes up that, because it can be proven that until this is extinguished, this grasping, the view of the transitory collection as inherently existent I and mind is also not extinguished. It is established that these apprehensions of persons and other phenomena as truly existent are afflicted ignorance. Hence, it is very important to know how to posit the consequentialist, the Prasangika, unique presentation of the afflicted emotions. So Lama Tsongkhapa is just giving sort of affirmation for his, what's it called, exegesis? No, not exegesis. When you sort of go off on a tangent, what is that called? So his like diversion into this section that was not mentioned in Chandrakirti's commentary on the Prasangika view of the afflictions. So he's just saying it's very important to know how to posit the Prasangika unique presentation of the afflictions. Okay, so that's where we are. Okay, so I'm just going to read this, and then we'll continue here next time. Jimpa's translation. The way other afflictions, such as attachment, operate. So right now we've been just talking about ignorance. How do the other afflictions operate? They somehow are related with ignorance, right? So he says, the way other afflictions, such as attachment, anger, pride and so forth, operate on the basis of delusion, grasping at true existence. Or as Jeffrey says, with respect to how the other afflictive emotions, such as desire and so forth, also operate from the bewilderment, or Jimpa translates bewilderment, moha, as delusion. Jeffrey says bewilderment. Basically, it's ignorance, right? With respect to how other afflicted emotions, such as attachment and so forth, also operate from the ignorance that is a consciousness apprehending true existence. Let us explain this in accordance with Chandrakirti's commentary on Aryadeva's stanza from the 400 stanzas. So this is Jimpa translates it as, just as the body faculty in the entire body, just like that, just like the body faculty in the entire body, delusion, or you could say ignorance, moha, this is the other, alternative to the word marikpa. Delusion resides in all the afflictions. Or as Jeffrey translates that, just as the body's sense power pervades the body, bewilderment or ignorance abides in all the afflicted emotions as their basis. Okay, that's where we're going to stop today. This is a very, very famous quotation. I think we've probably mentioned it a couple of times. So just as the body's sense power. So what does that mean? Pervades the body. That means if you have the sense, the eye sense faculty also being one of the sense faculties of of one's form aggregate, the body sense power also pervades that. So if you were to take a needle and stick it into the eye faculty, of course, if you stick it into the eye itself, it hurts, right? If you stick it into the eye faculty, that would also experience some suffering. Same thing with the ear faculty and the nose faculty and the tongue faculty. The body faculty pervades all of them. And in the same way, ignorance pervades all of the delusions. So that's what we're gonna try to unpack next time. How are we doing? Oh, okay, a couple of thumbs up. Any questions before we end? Everyone's satisfied? Okay. So
Does the nihilist view fall in that philosophical tenets that they were talking about versus the innate versus, where it was talking about innate,
I missed the very first word of your sentence. Does the
the
what?
nihilism,
Does nihilism what?
does that fall into the tenets, philosophical, those affected by philosophical tenets?
Yeah, so nihilistic positions, there'd be some kind of philosophical position that let's say one position that might be recognizable was that phenomena do not exist at all. Right? That's an extreme view, right? That phenomena don't exist at all. The correct view is that they don't exist as truly existent, but they do exist conventionally. Right? So the nihilistic position would be once you've proved emptiness, that they're empty of true existence or empty of inherent existence, that shows they don't exist at all. That would be a nihilistic position. So I'm not sure. That's you investigate. What do you think? Does that have an innate version of that? Can that be a kind of ignorance that has abided with us since beginningless time and just needs the right situation to arise?
I would think it would fall into the tenet category, but I don't know.
I don't think it's an innate kind of thing. I think it's something that's intellectually formed. Anyway, let's dedicate the merits due to these virtues, rather, gewadihi, that we've created through the collection of wisdom and collection of merit. Due to these virtues, may I quickly become a Guru Buddha and thereby lead all beings, all migrators without exception, into that very state. May the supreme precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen in my own mind and in the minds of others not diminish, but increase more and more. And then for our dear Guru Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas. So those are three categories, right? Or four categories. Teacher, precious teacher, assembly of children of the victorious ones, means the Bodhisattvas, the Shravakas, the Pratika Buddhas, victorious Losang Drakpa, Lama Khapa, who is the spiritual father to his two sons, spiritual sons, Gyaltsab and Kedrub, together with your lineage, all the objects of refuge of the infinite realms, please bestow now the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. In upholding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you, Lama Zopa, wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. Sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare both of the conqueror's teachings and for mother sentient beings, mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. At this I lost hope. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truths of the oceanic blessings of the three jewels, as well as the great waves of bodhicitta of the Bodhisattvas, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And for all of our spiritual teachers, you who are my eyes for viewing all the infinite scriptures, the supreme gateway for fortunate ones traveling to liberation, engaging with skillful means, moved by mercy, illuminating spiritual friends. I make this request. The implicit request is please live long and stable lives. Okay, thank you for again attempting to chew these philosophical dry bones and enhancing your logic and store of Buddhist understanding so that in the future, when you hear the Buddha teaching in one of your future lives, maybe when Maitreya comes, you'll be born as one of his disciples, and imprints of these teachings now, you will be able to follow what Maitreya is saying. So I thank you for your attendance and your steadfastness. I look forward to seeing some of you on Monday. Take care, and we'll see you at least next Saturday. See you.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Venerable